You're standing in a tent in eastern Syria, 4 a.m., sand and everything. Your boots, your coffee, the classified folder in your hands. Across the table sits a 2-star general who hasn't slept in 30 hours. He needs to make a decision in the next 90 minutes that will put 200 Marines into a compound where either 40 insurgents are planning an attack on a coalition base or 40 civilians are sheltering from a conflict they didn't start. The satellite imagery says one thing. The signals intelligence says another. The human source you've been running for 11 months says something else entirely. The general looks at you. Not at the folder. At you. Because the folder is data. You're the person who has to tell him what the data means. What you say in the next 3 minutes will determine whether those Marines go in, whether 40 people live or die, whether this becomes a successful operation or an international incident. You open the folder, your voice is steady. It has to be. But to understand how you got here, standing in the sand at 4 a.m. holding someone's life in a manila folder, you need to go back. CIA, FBI, NSA. Everyone knows these names. They're in movies, on magazine covers, in congressional hearings that make the evening news. DIA. 3 letters that most people have never heard. That's not an accident. The Defense Intelligence Agency. Founded in 1961, the same year the Bay of Pigs invasion failed, because 3 military intelligence branches couldn't coordinate a coherent picture of what was happening on the ground in Cuba. The Army had its version, the Navy had its version, the Air Force had another. None of them matched. President Kennedy was furious. Secretary of Defense McNamara created the DIA to fix it. One agency, one picture. No more contradictions. The CIA gets the movies. The NSA gets the scandals. The DIA gets the mission. 16,500 employees. Operatives in 140 countries. Analysts at every major military command on Earth. A quarter of everything in the President's daily brief comes from DIA. A quarter. The most important intelligence document in the world, and DIA writes 25% of it. Most Americans don't know the agency exists. That's by design. The CIA collects intelligence to inform policy. The DIA collects intelligence to win wars. That's the difference. The CIA briefs politicians. The DIA briefs generals. The CIA operates in embassies under diplomatic cover. The DIA operates in forward operating bases under mortar fire. When a special operations team needs to know what's behind a door before they kick it in, that intelligence came from DIA. When a carrier strike group needs to know the capability of an enemy's anti-ship missiles before they sail into range, that assessment came from DIA. When the Secretary of Defense needs to know whether a foreign military is preparing for war or bluffing, the analysis sitting on his desk was written by a DIA officer who spent 15 years studying that country's order of battle. You didn't come from the military. Some DIA officers do, but you came from Georgetown, International Security Studies, a master's thesis on Chinese military modernization that caught someone's attention. A professor who'd done consulting work for the intelligence community mentioned your name to someone who mentioned it to someone else. That's how recruitment works, not a knock on the door. A quiet introduction that you don't recognize as recruitment until you're already in the process. The interviews last 4 months. Polygraphs, background investigations that go back to your high school girlfriend, financial reviews, psychological evaluations. They don't just want to know what you've done. They want to know how you think. They give you incomplete data sets and ask you to make assessments. They give you contradictory reports and ask which one you believe and why. They're testing whether you can hold uncertainty without collapsing into false confidence. The intelligence community doesn't need people who are always right. It needs people who know exactly how wrong they might be. You pass. You report to the Defense Intelligence Analysis Center at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling in Washington, D.C. A campus that looks like any other government facility. Badge access, fluorescent lights, cafeteria food. The difference is what's on the screens. Training takes 11 months, not because the material is hard, although it is, but because the way you're taught to think has to be rebuilt from the ground up. Graduate school taught you to build arguments. DIA teaches you to build assessments. The difference is that an argument persuades, an assessment informs. You're not trying to convince anyone of anything. You're trying to give a decision maker the clearest possible picture so they can decide. Your opinion matters, but only as far as the evidence supports it. If the evidence is ambiguous, you say it's ambiguous. If you don't know, you say you don't know. Confidence levels. Low, moderate, high. Every statement tagged with how certain you are and why. A general reading your assessment at 3 a.m. in a combat zone needs to know the difference between we assess with high confidence and we assess with moderate confidence. The first means act. The second means proceed with caution. The third, low confidence, means you're guessing. And guessing with the U.S. military costs lives in quantities that don't fit on a single page. You learn all source analysis, not just one type of intelligence, all of it simultaneously. Signals intelligence from NSA, phone calls and radio transmissions, and encrypted data that's been decoded by mathematicians you'll never meet. Imagery from NRO, satellite photographs with resolution classified so high that the number itself is a secret. Human intelligence from DIA's own clandestine service and from CIA sources, reports from people on the ground who saw things with their eyes and described them in their words, with all the bias and courage and error that human observation contains. Open source intelligence from foreign media, academic publications, social media posts by soldiers who don't know they're providing intelligence every time they take a photo with a military base in the background. Measurement and signature intelligence, the technical data from nuclear tests, missile launches, underground facilities. Each source tells part of the story. Your job is to hold all of them at once and synthesize a single coherent picture. When the sources agree, the picture is clear. When they contradict each other, and they will, often, the picture is a puzzle you have to solve before someone makes a decision based on what you see in the incomplete pieces. You learn the defense attaché system. DIA operates out of U.S. embassies in 140 countries. Defense attachés are uniformed military officers who serve as the official liaison between the U.S. military and foreign militaries. They attend parades. They go to receptions. They build relationships with foreign generals over years of dinners and handshakes, and they report everything. The way a foreign officer talks about his own government, the weapons systems on display at a military exercise, the body language of a defense minister. When you mention a specific treaty, it's intelligence collection disguised as diplomacy, and DIA has been doing it since 1961. You learn the Defense Clandestine Service. Created in 2012, this is DIA's covert arm. Officers operating undercover in hostile countries, running human sources, recruiting assets who provide information that satellites can't see and signals can't intercept. The CIA does this too, but the CIA focuses on political intelligence. The DCS focuses on military intelligence. What weapons does this country actually have? Not what they say they have. What's the real readiness of their forces? Not the readiness they report. What are their generals actually planning? Not what they announce at press conferences. The kind of intelligence that determines whether a war is coming and whether you'd win it. Your first real assignment is the Analysis Directorate. China Desk. You spend 14 months reading everything the U.S. intelligence community produces about the People's Liberation Army. Order of battle, force structure, weapons procurement, training exercises, doctrine publications that most Western analysts ignore because they're written in bureaucratic Mandarin and read like manuals, which is exactly what they are. Manuals for how a military of 2 million active personnel intends to fight the next war. You become fluent in the language of Chinese military capability, not Mandarin, although you're learning that too. The language of what a military can actually do versus what it says it can do. The gap between those two things is where wars are won or lost, and mapping that gap is your entire job. You learn that the PLA's public statements about capability are designed to project strength. Your job is to figure out whether the strength is real. A new aircraft carrier looks impressive on the news. You analyze the flight operations data, the sortie rates, the maintenance cycles. You determine that the carrier can launch a fraction of the aircraft the PLA claims. That assessment changes how the Pacific Fleet positions itself. The difference between what a weapon looks like and what it can do is the difference between posture and threat, and your analysis is the only thing standing between the two. You write your first assessment at month 6, a report on Chinese naval expansion in the South China Sea. How many ships, what type, what capability, where they're deployed, what that deployment pattern suggests about intent. The report goes through 14 rounds of review before it's published, every sentence challenged, every source verified, every confidence level debated. When it finally goes out, it's 8 pages long and carries your name, although no one outside the intelligence community will ever see it. It lands on the desk of the Pacific Fleet commander. He reads it before a planning meeting. The decisions made in that meeting are informed by your words. Ships move because of what you wrote. Thousands of sailors adjust their posture because your assessment said the threat had changed. You never meet the commander. You never see the ships. You just write the truth as clearly as you can and trust that someone uses it well. 2 years in, you deploy. Not as an analyst behind a desk, as a field intelligence officer embedded with a military unit in the Middle East. The transition is jarring. In Washington, intelligence is clean, reports on screens, data in folders. In the field, intelligence is a person sitting across from you in a room that smells like cigarettes and fear, telling you things that could get them killed if anyone finds out they're talking to you. Your job is to run human sources, assets, people who have access to information you need and who, for reasons ranging from money to ideology to personal grievance, are willing to share it. You meet them in safe houses, in cars, in markets where the crowd provides cover. Every meeting is a risk. For you, because you're an American intelligence officer in a country where that designation makes you a target. For them, because they're committing treason against organizations that execute traitors. You develop a source you call Atlas, a mid-level officer in a militia group that's been attacking coalition forces. Atlas doesn't believe in the cause anymore. He watched his commander order the execution of 3 civilians and decided he was on the wrong side. He contacts you through an intermediary, a chain of trust that starts with someone who knows someone who once worked with American forces and hasn't forgotten the relationship. The vetting takes weeks. Is he real? Is he a plant sent to feed you disinformation? Is the information he's providing verifiable through other sources? You test him. You ask questions you already know the answers to. He passes every test. You ask questions nobody knows the answers to. The answers check out when you verify them through satellite imagery 3 days later. Over 11 months, Atlas provides intelligence that prevents 4 attacks on coalition bases. His information is specific. Dates, locations, methods, personnel. The names of commanders, the location of weapons caches, the routes used for smuggling explosives. You cross-reference everything against signals intelligence and satellite imagery. It matches. Atlas is the best source you've ever run. He's also a human being with a wife and 2 children who don't know what he's doing, and every time you meet him in a safe house that smells like concrete dust and kerosene, you're both calculating the odds that this is the meeting where someone followed him. You learn his mannerisms, the way he checks his phone when he's nervous, the way he sits with his back to the wall, the way he drinks tea with both hands, which he told you once is a habit from his village, where tea was the only warm thing in winter. You're not supposed to get attached to sources. You do anyway. The training says maintain professional distance. The reality is that you're asking a man to risk his life for information, and pretending that doesn't create a bond is a lie the agency tells itself to make the paperwork cleaner. The night everything changes is a Thursday. Atlas doesn't show for a scheduled meeting. You wait 90 minutes. Protocol says 60, but you wait because the Atlas is never missed. You leave. You don't sleep. The next morning, your signals team intercepts a communication. A militia commander congratulating his men on identifying a traitor. No name mentioned. No confirmation it's Atlas. But you know. You never hear from Atlas again. You don't know if he's alive. You can't ask. You can't search. You can't do anything that might confirm he was your source, because if he is alive and they're not sure, your inquiry could be the thing that kills him. You file a report. Source Atlas, status unknown, presumed compromised. 8 words that represent 11 months of trust and 4 prevented attacks, and a man who chose the right side and may have paid for it with his life. You carry that. You'll carry it forever. It's the weight of the job that nobody tells you about, not the classified information, not the security restrictions, the people, the sources who risk everything and sometimes lose everything, and you can't even acknowledge they existed. You're back in Washington for the Syria briefing. 2 years of field work compressed into a readjustment period that takes exactly as long as your next assignment allows, which is 3 weeks. You're reassigned to the Joint Operations Directorate, real-time intelligence support for active military operations, the watch floor, screens showing feeds from every theater, analysts tracking engagements, monitoring enemy movements, providing updates to commanders who are making decisions in real time. This is where you are when the serious situation develops. An asset in country reports that a compound in eastern Syria is being used as a staging area for an attack on a coalition base. Satellite imagery shows vehicles arriving over the past 48 hours. Signals intelligence picks up communications referencing a timeline. But there's a problem. A separate source, an NGO operating in the area, reports that the same compound is sheltering displaced families. The imagery can't tell the difference between a truck carrying weapons and a truck carrying supplies. The signals could be referencing an attack or a defensive preparation by people who know they're in a conflict zone. 2 stories, same data. One ends with a successful military operation. The other ends with dead civilians on the front page of every newspaper in the world. You compile everything, every source, every image, every intercept. You build 2 competing assessments. One supports the military threat interpretation. One supports the civilian shelter interpretation. You assign confidence levels to each. You flag the contradictions you can't resolve. You note what additional collection could clarify the picture, but you also note that the timeline doesn't allow for it. The decision has to be made with what exists now. You fly to the forward operating base. You sit across from the general. You open the folder. You lay out both assessments. You tell him what you know, what you don't know, and what you think but can't prove. You tell him the human source has been reliable for 11 months, but that the NGO report can't be dismissed. You tell him the confidence level's moderate, which means proceed with caution. The general asks what you do. You tell him that's not your job. Your job is to give him the clearest picture possible. The decision is his. He sends a reconnaissance team instead of a full assault. 12 operators, not 200 Marines. They approach at night. They confirm weapons in the compound. They also confirm families. Both stories were true. Insurgents using civilians as cover. The operation is redesigned, surgical. The operators extract the families before engaging the militants. It takes 6 hours instead of 90 minutes. 3 operators are wounded, no civilians killed, 14 militants captured. If the general had sent 200 Marines based on the first assessment alone, the civilians would have been collateral damage. If he'd stood down based on the second assessment alone, the attack on the coalition base would have happened. The moderate confidence assessment, the one that said both things might be true, gave him the room to find a third option. That's what intelligence is supposed to do. Not make decisions, inform them. Years pass. You move through assignments the way DIA officers do. Analysis, operations, policy support. Each rotation builds a different kind of knowledge. You learn that the DIA's power isn't in any single capability. It's in the fusion. The ability to take a satellite image and a human source report and a signals intercept and a foreign military publication and see them not as separate data points, but as a single picture. The CIA sees politics. The NSA sees communications. The NRO sees geography. The DIA sees the battlefield, the whole battlefield, not just where the troops are, but why they're there, what they can do, what they're planning, and what happens if they succeed. You brief 4-star generals who control more firepower than most countries. You write assessments that go into the president's daily brief. You train new analysts who come in the same way you did, smart, eager, confident in their education, and completely unprepared for the weight of what they're about to learn. You tell them the same thing someone told you. The intelligence community doesn't need people who are always right. It needs people who know how wrong they might be. The secrets accumulate, not just classified information, although there's plenty of that. The other kind, the things you've seen that you process alone because the only people who understand are the people sitting next to you on the watch floor, and even they don't talk about it after shift. The sources you lost, the assessments that were wrong, and the operations that went sideways because of it. The times the intelligence was perfect, and the decision maker ignored it because it didn't align with what they wanted to hear. The times the intelligence was wrong, and people died because of what you wrote, and you had to go back through every sentence and figure out where the analysis failed, and whether the failure was in the data or in you. You learn something they don't teach in training. The hardest part of intelligence isn't collecting it, it's living with what it tells you. You know which allies are lying about their military capabilities. You know which countries are closer to nuclear weapons than the public believes. You know which conflicts are simmering right now that will boil over in 18 months, and you've written the report, and it sits in a queue behind 40 other reports, because there are only so many crises the government can process at once. You know which dictators are stable and which are one assassination attempt away from collapse, and what that collapse would mean for the 12 million people who live under their authority. You can't talk about any of it. Not to your family, not to your friends, not to the journalists who write about national security with confidence and incomplete information. You sit at dinner parties and listen to people debate foreign policy based on what they read in the newspaper, and you say nothing because saying anything would be a federal crime. The DIA doesn't make headlines. It doesn't get congressional investigations named after it. It doesn't have a Hollywood franchise. It operates in the space between the intelligence community and the warfighter, translating secrets into decisions, data into action, information into survival. 16,500 people doing this every day in 140 countries, and most Americans couldn't name the agency if you gave them the first 2 letters. That's fine. That's how it should be. The best intelligence work is invisible. It's the war that didn't happen because someone saw it coming. The ambush that was avoided because an analyst noticed a pattern. The negotiation that succeeded because the diplomats knew what the other side's military could actually do. You don't get credit for catastrophes that never occurred. You don't get thanked for battles that were never fought. The absence of disaster is the only evidence that you did your job. You're still at it. Older now. The coffee is still cold. The screens still glow. The data still flows faster than any human can process it. Somewhere, a defense attaché is having dinner with a foreign general and memorizing every word. Somewhere, a clandestine service officer is meeting a source in a car in a city you can't name. Somewhere, an analyst is writing a report that will move ships or prevent a war or save lives that will never know they were in danger. You won't be in the news, you won't be in a movie, you won't be thanked at a press conference or recognized at a ceremony that anyone outside the building will ever hear about. The work is invisible, the weight is permanent, the mission doesn't end. The general in that tent in Syria made the right call. You helped him make it. That has to be enough. Most days it is.